there's experiences that I really don't enjoy in the game having to experience again, like deaths and stuff like that of characters. Um, but I can see why you would do it, so that you can't just, oh well, I'll deal with it later. And I might on my own time go through this, and if I feel like I'm getting close to one of the things, I might see if I can get a stream bonus on it. But it doesn't seem completely feasible for me. The pix balls, I think you have to beat the side game to unlock each of those. And the getting every single pix ball means getting all the variants. It means like probably burning through a lot of just busy work as well. It's possibly doable. I don't know. I don't know if I would feel like doing it. I've I've played many of games that I do like that I did not bother to get all achievements on. They are not always something that I am that concerned about doing, especially if I don't think I can 100% it, and I don't know if my patience would permit me to 100% this, especially because of things like that time trial section, which again, like I said, I understand it being a mechanic in the game, I just don't find it fun. I will say though that the strongest part of this game, by far, absolutely the strongest part, is the writing. I think the writing in this game is indeed very good. There are apparently still updates, which, I mean, it's only been a little over a month, so I guess that's reasonable. Game assist. Oh, apparently if you go back into chapter select, it might have chests in the wrong position, which is also, or it used to be in the wrong position, which means like that could be pretty unfortunate. But anyway, so it's definitely, I will say this, I will absolutely say this game is not lazy. This game has a lot of passion and a lot of effort and a lot of quality in it. I'm definitely not knocking that. I absolutely believe that there's a lot of value in the game. There's just some things that I think could be fixed. And that's fine. I'm not saying a game has to be perfect by any means. I am going to be critical though if I can, because I mean, I did spend money on the game. I bought the game. I paid full price for it because I was told it was a good game, and I agree, it is a good game. Is it something everyone will enjoy? Probably not. There are some things in this game that I feel would make for a gameplay that someone may not enjoy doing, which that's acceptable too. Um, I don't have a sincere, like, spot in my heart for this as I do something like Undertale or like even like Vacna, which just happened. Um, I would not consider this that type of game. Um, it's kind of in a second upper tier. It's a good game. I'm not saying it's not a good game. I'm not even saying it's not a particularly great game. I think it's very ambitious. I think it has a lot of great qualities. But there are just some things that, from my perspective, bug me a lot. I went over them in a rant already, so I'm not going to recap that. But I do think that the people who put their work into this game created something special. I think that there's a reason that this does have the fanfare it has. And again, people who are more confident and more patient, it's probably completely reasonable, completely acceptable, and I'm being a wuss. And that's fine. I mean, that happens. I definitely am not good at games that other people think are easy. I've never beaten Super Mario World, for example. I love Super Mario World, and I've never beaten Super Mario World. I've never gotten past World 5 in Super Mario. But I still have my opinions, and I feel like they're at least somewhat valid. Um, I think at the end of the day, the biggest things for me is when the mini games. Once again, there's a mini game that in this I do think actually has plot relevance, so I think it's worth it. But it seems like you basically have to use a guide to beat it. I don't know how you could otherwise go about finishing the whole game. It seems very, very much like either months of trial and error or unfeasible without a guide. It just seems like it's. I went in thinking it was going to be really, really interesting, and that maybe it would be like kind of a Dragon Quest-ish kind of thing, and I was wrong. I was 100% wrong about my first interpretation of it. It's not like Dragon Quest at all. It's a lot more like, well, no. I went in thinking it was going to be more like Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and realized it was more like Dragon Quest, minus the fact that it seems like there's some pretty major drawbacks to it. It again has the seemingly artificial time limit, which I never like in games. As I've said it a million times. Time limits to me, mostly all they do is get me stressed, and they don't make me feel any more rewarded. I know some people like to use them to set goals or whatever, and it can make people feel like they have a challenge. But to me, a lot of time limits feel very arbitrary, and even if you justify them in the plot, I guess one thing is a time limit to me can feel very distracting. I guess that's one way to look at it. I can find a time limit so distracting that I'm not focusing on what I'm doing. And that's generally, I mean, that might just be a way that I'm non-neurotypical, where it's just that distracting that it can cause me not to do something that otherwise I should be able to do. But either way, what I will say about the game is I might have been relatively harsh because I was so frustrated and angry finishing that one section. Even though I did it relatively quickly, I'll admit I did it fairly quickly, all things considered. The idea of it, the very concept of it, irritates me enough that it didn't feel rewarding at all. I didn't feel any sense of gaining things from the success. But other than that, I mean, I will say, I have said, as I'm known to do when I do these, where I say the same thing 60 times until people are bored and probably have already clicked off the video. But it's a very good game. It has a lot of fantastic qualities, and I wish I could do pixel art like that. Pixel art is a thing I absolutely love and adore. You can do pixel art of a lot of things that I otherwise wouldn't like, and I will love that type of art. I'm not big on sometimes particularly thorough and intricate, busy types of certain types of art. Like, I'm not as big on Art Nouveau as I am Art Deco, but if you make pixel art Nouveau, I probably think it was beautiful. I just have an inherent passion for pixel art. And I've done some pixel art, but nothing anywhere near this scope, near this quality. And I really commend the artists on this. I really, really do. I will say at the end of the day, the animator who did the beginning and the pixel artists are monumentally phenomenal, really, really good at what they do. They probably are on par with the writing. And even that, I'd probably say the art is better than the writing. simply because I feel like it falls into a couple of tropes that I feel are a little bit, but that's not to subtract from the overall story being good, being compelling, being worth going through. If I didn't care, I wouldn't have gone all the way through it in my vacation time when I could have done lots of other things. The game has a lot of quality, so I don't want to knock that. I don't want to say by any means that it's trash. It's not at all. There is a lot worth experiencing. And I bet that a lot of people who are better at games than I am would find a lot more to love in this game. Because a game like this definitely requires patience, and probably a lot more than I have. I just kind of eked by, I suppose. But it does have a little bit of stuff for everyone, I feel. I don't think necessarily everyone would like the game overall. Like Shin, for example, I couldn't even get him to try it. But it's got a decent, actually, it's got a fairly good combat system. I feel like it's sometimes a little redundant. I feel like if I'd used more of my weapons with more creative variety, that might have been on me. I understand that. But the actual combat, the enemies, the AI all seems fairly decent as far as the combat's concerned, so I would give that a plus. I absolutely would. I think the combat is good. I think that the pacing of the story is fairly good, except for when you're like the biggest thing with the pacing problem is a similar thing that I had in Rakuen, where there's places where I just wish you could move a little faster. It doesn't have to be when there's combat. I can understand balancing your motion to fit combat, but when you're forced to like walk slowly in towns or walk slowly during semi-cutscene areas, it really makes you antsy and just want to get on sometimes. And so it's a criticism I've had for plenty of games in the past. And it's not an easy thing to perfect by any means. I don't think that there's any kind of panacea for that problem because the situation's different for everything. In a horror game, if it's one where you can try and evade or run away from the enemy, then you want to be able to go fairly fast when you're running. You can put a stamina meter and have your regular motion be a little sluggish. In a more story-based game, you don't want the pace to be so fast that you're ignoring what's going on. And in a game that's more artistic, you don't want to be going so fast that you're not seeing the beauty in the art. So it's not like you can just make people go 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time. And in some cases, going too fast can actually make the game way more difficult. And so you do have to do a lot of balancing with it. But I just feel like in this particular case, your movement speed, especially when it switches to you walking seemingly arbitrarily, it doesn't always match up with the speed that I would prefer. What are some other mechanics and things? Oh, the music. The music is very charming, very good. There are several of those songs, like I said, that I wouldn't object to having in my car or while I'm drawing or things like that. The overall package, everything put together, works well together. Like I said, I could probably nitpick a few of the things like I do with mini games or like I do with the more frustrating challenges. But in the context of the whole game, nothing feels so out of left field that it doesn't feel cohesive to the game. Like I said, there might be a couple of spots that you could cleave off or polish up so that it was more like 100% even, but nothing feels unfit. At least when there are situations that are janky, there's contextual value to it. There's contextual reason to it. And I think that's good. I think the fact that so in some games when they have some sort of mini game that's available throughout the whole game, it's like mentioned once and no one talks about it again. It seems actually like crucial to the plot of the story, and it reflects the actual plot of the main game pretty evenly in just a slightly more fantastical and like high fantasy sense fantastical. Um, but that said, it still does feel awkward as a minigame. It's just I think that its integration into the overall game seems fitting. The baseball sections, again, they're justified within their context. The wrangling is justified within the context. I think the most point on that one is to teach you how to aim in the wrangling sections. But it really does do an impressive effort at trying to make sure everything that's in the game fits in the game. And that is definitely something to commend because there's plenty of games that do not do something like that. There are plenty of games where I might even like the game and there's something that just feels awkward in it or feels unfit and just like out of like out of space, I suppose. I don't know. I don't know how to phrase it. But there's definitely times where you can have. I can't think of any off the top of my head because I only have my like 10 favorites on here, for example. Oh, so like I said with DK64, that's one example. Um, it shoehorns into old rare games that aren't necessarily particularly fun. Definitely suffer. The game is so old that certain difficulty things feel arbitrary and unfun. They're not mentioned again, and there's no explanation as to why they have any value within the context of the game. So that's a great example. I love Rare during the time where they were making those games. Banjo-Kazooie, DK64, Banjo-Tooie, Donkey Kong Countries 1, 2, not so much 3. Um, and then there's plenty of people who love 3 or love Perfect Dark or things like that. They've made lots of fantastic games, especially during that time frame. But that said, I will definitely mark that as a point of criticism for the game, is that its mini games feel very awkward, arbitrary, and uncomfortable, and don't add to the game in my mind. If anything, they subtract from it by pulling me out of the enjoyment of the game. I would even say that some of its bonus barrels and stuff like that also do that to some extent, but at least within that, the framing is moderately, not a lot. I'd still say it's at least on thin ice. Moderately is fitting more because it's at least still using your characters and you're still connecting it in one way or another. So, to me, I guess that's a decent example. Is the idea that mini games can be integrated very poorly into a game, even if it's a good game, which I don't know that people would call DK64 a good game anymore. It's an enjoyable game to some extent. It definitely feels, like I said, aged and clunkier compared to Banjo-Kazooie, and I think a lot of that had to do with rushing. Um, but this, and that's another thing. Nothing in this game feels rushed. You have a little bit more advantage on that with most indie developers. The indie developers tend to work at their own pace a little better. They don't have the bureaucracy telling them it needs to be released by X date so that we can get the quarterly whatever. Um, Nothing here feels lazily implemented. Nothing here feels incompletely implemented. It's just that there are a couple things that feel maybe less comfortable or like they could use a little bit more repair or a little bit more polish. But that doesn't make them feel like they weren't thought about. They weren't careful in the idea. It's just, I definitely had points in here. Even so, I'm definitely focused on that one thing because that one thing really did bother me. I mean, it's enough that 2 days of it, and even after a time where I was trying to cool down, not even thinking about the game, it's still on my mind. But there were a few other things. The cooking, I didn't know where you were supposed to find some of those things, and I'm guessing that the recipe had to do with some of those less common ones. Um, it looks like it was 3 of the same item recipes that I was mostly missing. The mechanics of battle, I will say that other than for the one puzzle that each one's kind of needed for, the other weapons don't personally to me feel necessary. I only use them at a bare minimum on pretty much each of them. Uh, they're not bad. They're not poorly implemented, and I'm sure that if one felt more comfortable to you, you might use that. It's actually interesting that I guess a big part of why I didn't deviate towards one of the other weapons is because I really hate ammunition. I hate having to deal with ammunition. I don't object to ammunition by any means. It's one of those mechanics that I can't say is unacceptable because it absolutely is reasonable. It's logical. Um, but I just don't like dealing with it, so I usually don't unless it's a necessity for a given thing. I was more inclined to use a bomb in any situation than guns. I will say that is one criticism I had about the ammunition is you can carry relatively close, not exactly because you can carry 10 bombs, relatively close in the amount of bombs as you can the bullets. I feel like the bullets should either be 50 and 10 for bombs, or, and this might be a criticism going the other way where I can at least understand why the 10 is what it is. You could also do keep it 30 and add 5 bombs, but I do feel like that would be really risky at veering into busy work territory. We're going back for ammunition. So I get it. I understand. But it does mean that that kind of ratio feels a little odd to me. But it's a much more minor nitpick. A lot for me is I don't like dealing with ammo, so I'm not the best person to ask for things that involve ammo. But the weapons all feel comfortable. I still think that the aiming's a little off sometimes, but that could be my controller. That could be a lot of other things, so I can't really pin that heavily on the game, except when it makes the motion feel too precise for a given situation, like with the time limit. Um, but I do think that, as I've been kind of trying to emphasize here, everything feels coherent. Everything feels like it's part of the universe. Nothing feels unusual. There's not even in this, other than I guess the overhead narrator between chapters, none of the like dialogue feels awkward. Everything feels in context. People have speech patterns. I've heard people say if someone's speaking in a southern accent, let the player interpret it that way. Don't put ah instead of I. Don't end ings with in apostrophe. Don't do things like that. Don't have day instead of they if they have like a thick Boston accent. I disagree. I don't think it's harmful. I think it helps give the personalities more color than it would if you use the same stock prose essay style of writing for everybody. Um, I mean, for example, just by reading that the seafood guy says "poor blimey," that's the only time I realized he was supposed to speak in a British accent, and it makes sense. It doesn't seem odd to have that there because it seems like a multicultural city. Um, the dialogue of, I would say, the dialogue of every character is at a minimum good. For some, it's great, and for some, obviously, they won my heart. I really like Alba. I really like Sam. I enjoy Isabel, except for again the idea of making it that she killed a dog. Um, I enjoy the personalities of the characters, even some of the ones that I would imagine. I could see some people finding both Daniels annoying. I could see some people finding that Lee could be annoying even. Characters who are somewhat plot important, somewhat plot relevant, I could see people finding them annoying, but I personally like them and find them very charming. Um, oh, I guess another kind of nitpick I have: time travel is very difficult to do in a game. Time travel is very difficult to do, period, in any type of narrative structure. One, because it's really hard to keep it coherent within itself, and two, because of the fact that demonstrating it reasonably can be unorthodox at best. You have such as the looping and the looping. I get why it's saying the looping to show you that you're stuck in it, but I feel like on the second and third times where you're looping, instead of people talking so identical, and even Sam answering people so identically, I would either vary up the speech just enough to show that some people are aware something's unusual, or if the dialogue has to be the same, make it come onto the screen faster. I mean, like I said, at the very end, it just bulldozes through all the text, and I couldn't even read how she was trying to persuade Sam to give up. But when it's saying that were you a good man, were you a bad man, it says it 3 times, fairly slowly, even with the skip button. You can't get through it. And then, after giving you instructions to do one thing or do another thing, where you'd presume at least that you would repeat those things, such as getting the emotion chip or things like that, then you don't do them, which makes it also seem unusual because wouldn't he still need that for the surgery, the operation? Um, and so the redundancies seem inconsistent because I don't know why you wouldn't need X or wouldn't need Y, and why certain things repeat and certain things don't, when everything's supposed to be the same. And again, it's tricky. It's not an easy mechanic to implement into a game. It's not an easy idea to implement into a game. But I do think that it's at least worth criticizing. It's never going to be something where someone's going to come up with the perfect time travel story. It's there's no way to get that absolutely perfect. So I'm completely forgiving on the idea, except for the fact that I feel like you might be able to either have the dialogue all show up at once for each of the things that you know are going to repeat identically, or have certain things have a hint that people are aware something's up, but they either have already surrendered to that's what life is going to be, or they have an ulterior motive, such as with if Solomon were speaking. Right? So you could have him hiding it and realizing someone else is aware and trying to throw you off. Would be one thing you could do with someone like that, even though they're not actually in the instance in a way where that could come to be. But I guess it just felt more fatiguing, which the idea of a Groundhog Day is inherently going to be that way. I would imagine that Groundhog Day probably has its detractors, the movie, has its detractors because of the fact that certain parts might feel just too redundant and therefore annoying, which is supposed to be the idea. In fact, it gets to the point in that movie where he's just so exhausted that he's just throwing himself in front of buses and stuff because he knows that it's just going to be the same thing tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that you should become complacent with that idea. And I don't necessarily think they were complacent. They did try to do basically the bare minimum for the context. In that context, there's one time, one full loop where you're kind of questioning it, and then the third time it's different. So it's not overstaying its welcome any more than it has to, but that doesn't mean that the dialogue doesn't still feel a little sticky in this situation. All the locations seem fitting. All the locations have really good transitional points where like you go from the farm to the riverside up. There's scrap. And the scrap seems fitting. There's the poison swamp that segues into your kind of burnt up ground area and goes into the beach side. All those kind of situations, insofar as a video game can have it, since in reality geographical locations are miles long sometimes. But insofar as a video game that's done with tiles like this can go, there's no Bethesda syndrome. There's no walking for walking's sake. There's stuff to do while you're going, and it doesn't just feel like busy work while you're doing it. It feels like a challenge. I really do give that a big plus because there are good games. Like, there are places in Link's Awakening, which I loved Link's Awakening. There are places in it where I just feel like going, okay, there's going to be something different. Or parts where the puzzle isn't quite clear enough where you're just wandering. The only real things that aren't at least partly intuitive in the game are missables, collectibles that are non-mandatory for the actual gameplay. And so I gotta give that a plus, because it's very easy to make one or two mechanics in the actual main gameplay feel awkward, as I've been saying. In Link's Awakening, there are a couple places where I just felt like I was walking in circles, or even where I put down the game for a couple months, if I remember correctly, and then I happened to come back to it. Then I learned about the glitches and made the game impossible for myself, which was great. But the actual main playthrough of the game always feels intuitive. I was able to beat the first boss on the first shot through intuition alone. It didn't tell me what I needed to do, but I could see what I needed to do. I could understand what I needed to do, and it felt like I had learned it myself, and I'd understood from basic gamer knowledge and basic in context of the game experience what I needed to do. None of the bosses throughout the whole game, and this is really crucial as a very good positive for the game. None of the bosses through the whole game feel like they are unintuitive. I didn't see a single boss that I didn't, at least after fiddling for a couple of moments, I couldn't figure out any. There weren't any that were confusing. You knew what you had to do, and while sometimes what you had to do in some of the mini bosses especially was just wail on the thing and sometimes tank hits if you're lazy or not very confident you're dodging. But you knew what you had to do in every boss's case. And the bosses were not stock identical bosses from boss to boss, which is again a big plus. Having to break the icicle until I found out that you could just cheese it by being too close to the front, which might be a thing with the devs if they happen to see this. Look at making maybe the barriers just a little closer or the ice move a little higher up. None of the bosses in the middle of the game, nothing felt like either I was going to have to struggle or read an instruction booklet, or like the fact that you were fighting that boss at that point didn't fit. If you got the like getting Sam back, you knew you might have to use Sam's ability. When Sam's solo, there's only so many things you can do, so you know generally what you have to do. When you're, fighting different enemies, there's a decent benefit to experimenting. I didn't realize until the third time I saw those little, like, darkness creatures from the miasma that Sam's extra powerful to them and kills them by hitting them, unlike most enemies in the game. The game allows for experimentation, and other than with the redundant time limit thing feeling awkward, most of the obstacles don't feel unnecessarily punishing. And this is different from being very punishing and unnecessarily punishing. You can have something that's not very punishing but is unnecessarily punishing. Because I would actually argue that the overall punishment in the time limit sections is not very punishing, and at the very least, it is not very punishing. If you had that same, like the one where you have to hit the thing with Sam, if you had to redo absolutely everything from the beginning where that one's longer and zigzags through, that would be more unenjoyable. It's okay to have it where, you're going to have to do it a couple times. That's fine. I died several times, and that was fine. I don't think I ever complained about dying, other than in the stealth section, which isn't really dying, and the time limit section, which isn't dying. I don't know. A big thing is that games like this sometimes get ambitious enough where they try to get in some things that just don't feel necessary. And one of them in this game was the stealth, and one of them in this game was those timers just not feeling like you needed them. I feel like the challenges on their own were fine. Again, I don't think that they have to be. Well, I guess it may not even be. Again, I may not have said this before. I don't think that they have to be nixed. But the biggest thing is overall, the game is not a hard game. It's not a challenging. It's not a Dark Souls type of game. It's challenging enough that a new player might have trouble with it. It's challenging enough that if you're not paying attention, you're not going to just breeze through it. It's definitely one where there's a reward for exploration and a reward for giving it your all. And so it's kind of set there on the lower middle of difficulty. It's definitely more difficult than most of the story games that I've played, which is fine. But it is on the easy enough side that doing those things where it is punishing sometimes make it feel a little like they were for a different game, or like this game had hints that it was supposed to be tougher than it was. And it could just be, as I kind of said before, that I happened to be primed for every mechanic in this game except for timers. And that could be an on me thing, which I did say before. But I don't know. I'm definitely ready. I feel like I've gotten more different ideas out this time than I usually do in these. But I definitely feel like I'm rambling at this point, so I'll probably cut it off here. Um, Biggest takeaway: game is good. Game is worth buying. Worth buying at full price. You get your value out of the game. But there are just some things that I definitely feel could be polished. I could even in this game see a hard mode being implemented. Um, you could do an easy mode if you wanted to. I always feel like it would be okay in a story-based game to have a story mode for someone who just wants to experience the story. Because if they're willing to pay $25 for the whole story, great. Um, but I don't necessarily know if it needs an easy mode as much as it could benefit from a hard mode where the enemies do more damage and perhaps there's a tougher variation of some puzzles. I don't think it's necessary. I don't necessarily think that, other than maybe an achievement for beating hard modes, because the easy reward for it. But I do think you could have a difficult mode, and I feel like people would enjoy it. One thing you could do, I suppose, to make it a fresher experience is also have some different mechanics for enemies, or even some additional enemies if you did a hard mode. I do think it has the room for that. I think that it could be a legitimate addition. But even so, the game feels like a full package. It's definitely worth it. I will not deny it's definitely worth buying. All the way around. It's worth buying. Great art, great music, good story, reliably consistent challenges, a couple nitpicks. Name a game that doesn't have them. Um, but yeah, it's good. So I guess I'll leave on that. If you are thinking about getting this game, get it. I think it's one of those where a person. So with story-based games, a lot of people say that you lose a lot by watching a let's play or whatever. I don't think so. I think that you can get a lot more of a personal sensation by being the character, being the player. Um, I do not think One Shot, for example, would have hit me as hard if I was watching someone else play it. because I had to make that choice, and then Shin made the choice opposite of me, and I felt, a different way because I was like, well, that was robbed of me. And I had enough emotional sensation from it that I wanted to figure out what happens the other way, and that's how I found out there was even more to the game. Um, so yeah, I think this game's worth it. I think it's a game that anyone who likes story should go get. Let's just be prepared. There's a couple things that need fixing, or maybe not even need fixing. Could use fixing. I'll say that. Could use fixing. As it is, I think that it fits pretty well as a full game. With that said, I'm gonna probably not start anything. It's late enough. I was considering doing another City Skylines since I haven't done one in a while. One, I haven't gotten the expansion packs yet. I need to do that. And two, they might need installing. And three, just don't even have time yet. But I will probably be on again sometime relatively soon. I have to work for the next few days, probably. I will be returning from vacation, and since this kind of shortened my week, I might work 5 or 6 in a row even. Which is life. That's kind of what comes with the territory of taking a vacation is take it between 2 weeks. Sometimes you get scheduled weirdness. But yeah, so with that said, I think Andy was on. I think that's who I was looking at reading. So I don't think that Hell Hero's on. Wait, where'd all my channels go? This isn't what I'm looking for. Where's not looking for recommended channel. Yeah, we're gonna follow. That's what I want. Andy's on. Oh, I might grade MV. I haven't talked to MV in a few days. Actually, a couple weeks. I'm definitely gonna have to greet several people tonight because Corgi's on. If he's still on, I might go say hi to him. Andy's on, and MV's on. So yeah, I'm gonna rate MV. I'm gonna say hey to him, and then I'm gonna probably go to bed because I gotta be ready for tomorrow. I work early, not particularly early, but I have screwed up my schedule more than I wanted to. Last couple nights where I was playing this game, I played until roughly 2 o'clock, and yeah, that's late for having to go back to work soon. So I'm gonna probably call it grade actual. I'm gonna go. Oh, that's right. He might have disabled it. That's right. He might have disabled it. Well, then we'll raid. Let's raid Corgi. Corgi has less viewers right now. Let's raid Corgi. And I'll just have to say hi to him. He's got remote only chat going on right now, so I'll probably have to just say hi to him on Discord or something. I don't know why he disabled raids. Maybe he was getting some sort of bots or something. But yeah, so either way, we're gonna. Is it a Telltale thing? Um, we're gonna raid Corgi Martini. He's a good guy. He's actually bought some of my art. But yeah, so with that said, this has been Eastward. Good game. Couple quirks. Beautiful. In all artistic aspects, it's beautiful. But yeah, so with that said, thank you guys for watching. Have a good day and afternoon, morning, wherever you are. See you again real soon. Take care.